Harper for Papineau. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will be sharing my time with the member for Toronto Centre that this House has lost confidence in this government. That's not something that we say lightly. It's something that the Liberal Party is saying after serious thought, after consulting Canadians across the country, and above all, after having seen to what extent this government has not been up to the task of helping Canadians through this difficult time. It's not about wanting an election. It's simply that the Liberal Party cannot claim that we still have confidence in the government or that we believe that this government is up to the task entrusted to them by Canadians.
Used to mean something. It used to be a place of real debate, of real discussion on how to help Canadians participate more fully in our economic prosperity, how to help Canadians move forward with their hopes and dreams. And it was a place where we had real conversations about how to articulate our values into policy and address the big challenges on the horizon, looking at where we're going as a people and as a country. I know my grandfather, the member from Vancouver Centre, was here 70 years ago when this House was debating the rise of fascism in Europe, and through the years when we were dealing with a post-World War II Canada, industrializing, strengthening our manufacturing bases. There were real conversations. My father, 40 years ago, was here in this House to tackle bilingualism, to look at how Canada could be a force for good in the world, a balance in the rise of Cold War conflicts. There were issues that defined their times. And now, on the defining issues of our time, we seem to be nowhere to be found. Where is this government on the environment? How it affects Canadians here at home? How it affects the world that we are shaping, all of us together in this civilization? Where are we? Where is this government on the fight against poverty? The extreme poverty that exists around the world, but also in our own communities, particularly our Native communities. The fight against poverty is one that this government has not brought forward, not responded to the prodding from this half of the House to please address. This government has been totally absent from the defining issues of our time. And the irony, Madam Speaker, is that at a time where the Liberal Party is saying that this House has lost the confidence of the government, Canadians are suggesting that perhaps they've lost confidence in the capacity of this House collectively to deal with the important issues. No one has all the answers. This House, the 308 of us who gather from every corner of this country, have been tasked, entrusted by our constituents to try and work out compromises, work out policies that will help us through, that will come together and be worthy of the trust that Canadians have placed in us. And time again, this government has pushed us to fail Canadians in those responsibilities. When this government's perfect culminating achievement has been to create an atmosphere in this House of Commons that is based on attacks, on division, on extreme partisanship, they have succeeded in the one thing that we know the right-wing conservative ideology is all about, which is making Canadians believe less in their government and expect less from their government, and convince Canadians that governments shouldn't be in the business of anything other than short-term response to immediate pressing electoral problems. That is not what Canadians need. Unfortunately, it's been demonstrated that the politics of division can be very effective politically. To pick your votes, to pander to them, to discard those who weren't going to vote for you anyway. This current government is proof that that's a good way of getting elected. But it's also proof that you cannot govern a country as richly diverse as Canada, east to west, north to south, urban, rural. You cannot govern a Canada that is strong, not in spite of its differences, but because of them, by playing on divisions. And that is the great failing of this government. Je viens de compléter, Madame.
Madam Speaker, I just completed a tour of cégeps and universities in eastern Quebec. And everywhere, just like everywhere else in Canada where I spoke to people, Canadians, the same question came up. Why would we as young people be interested in what's going on in Parliament? Why would that be something that would interest us? Why would we want to get involved or even vote? There's the program Collection Compétences Jeunesse, a youth skill program which helps young people etch out a place in the workplace. This program targeted 65% of ridings which were in fact conservative ridings. And unfortunately, young people are disgruntled. There's a student unemployment rate of almost 20%.
Their jobs over the past year, the highest job loss of any age group. With all that, our youth have serious questions for this government. Serious questions that this government have been so far unwilling or incapable of answering. The tactics and the tone of this Conservative government are all designed to make Canadians believe less in their government, less in their society, and expect less of themselves. And nowhere is this more devastating than in its pernicious impact on our youth. Nos jeunes ont le talent.
Our young people have a lot of talent, intelligence, and the motivation required to really change the face of Canada and the world. But we're not helping them to dream. We're not getting them involved sufficiently. We're not giving the tools that they need.
Who are getting involved in record numbers with their communities, with international and domestic NGOs, who are caring deeply about how they shape their world, but how they can make a better community and a better future for all of us. The fact that they couldn't care less about what happens in this House is, for me, the most glaring indictment of this visionless government. The dominance of short-term pandering for votes, electoral strategies, has shortchanged all Canadians. The fact that we have been conditioned over the past 4 years to believe less of our government, to believe less in our capacity, all of us here, to propose large visions for this country, to say, who are we? Where do we want to go? That, for me, is the greatest failing here. There has been no articulation from these Conservatives of where we're going as a people and as a country, and that, for me, is the final failure in a long list that ends today for the Liberal Party of Canada. Now, let's be very clear. We do not want an election any more than any other Canadians. But the Liberal Party simply cannot pretend that this government is doing a good enough job at serving Canadians and building our future. This is not about politics. This is beyond politics. This is about demanding a parliament and a government that is worthy of the hopes and dreams of all Canadians. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I see many people rising, so I would like to ask members to limit their questions to 1 minute. I'll recognize the honourable member for Edmonton Millwoods Beaumont.
And the honourable member asks, who are we and what do we stand for? And I would point out, here's some things that people have said about who we are. Newsweek has said, if President Obama is looking for smart government, there's much he and all of us could learn from our neighbour to the north. The Economist has said about our Prime Minister, his government has taken prudent measures to help Canada weather a storm it cannot duck. New York Times has said about Canada, why not emulate the best in the world, which happens to be right next door? The Daily Telegraph in London, a newspaper, a publication that his leader ought to be fairly familiar with, says that the Canadian Tories are a model of how to behave during a downturn. Here's what the honourable member had to say about his own leader, the leader of the Liberal Party. He said, quote, maybe he has the intelligence, but maybe not the wisdom required. My question is this, is it possible that today is the perfect example of his leader's lack of wisdom?
The honourable member for Papineau, a very brief response of 1 minute.
Question, and I'm pleased to see all those clippings about how strong the Canadian banking system is, and would like to remind the honourable member that it was his leader who fought hardest and said we should be more like Citibank in this country. We need to unite our banks and try and create it, and it was Liberal policies that we have. It's also nice to see that it was a Liberal government, a Liberal opposition that pushed this government into responding to the stimulus when they came forward with an economic update that was absolute fabrication and were promising a surplus in the last election.
Right on.
The honourable member for Gatineau. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to know from my colleague for Papineau, who praises his party in stark contrast to the party across the way, I'd like to know where the $3.3 million from the sponsorship scandal has gone. The Liberals pocketed that money. Where is the $50 billion that was taken, skimmed off from the Employment Insurance Fund? This is money that was put into the fund by employees and employers. This fund was supposed to be able to provide adequate income when people were on the unemployment heap. Where's this money? This fund started with Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin, and they started to skim this fund. Order, please. I'd call on the honourable member for Papineau to respond. Well, I understand where my colleague is coming from. He understands that there is a passion for the Liberal Party in Quebec. People are interested. They want the Liberals to be back in government. They want a bit more of the past. Order.
I would like to give the honourable member a chance of responding while not being heckled by other members. C'est bon? Okay. For a brief question, the Honourable Minister of Heritage.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I found it interesting. He says this isn't about politics, but he wants to trigger an election campaign. He says this is about Canadians and policies. He stood there for 10 minutes and didn't put one single idea forward. He said employment insurance is very important. They walked away from the negotiations and the conversations this summer. He says the budget and the economy is so important. They offered no amendment to our budget. And he says our government is about division. This Conservative government is the longest-serving minority government in Canadian history. You get to have that record, Madam Speaker, by working with other political parties and getting things done. We were elected because Liberals failed, and we were re-elected because we're getting the job done. And the fact is, Madam Speaker, is that this vote tonight, and this member knows it, the NDP are doing the Liberals the biggest favour they've ever had in the history of their party.
The honourable member for Papineau.
Thank the Honourable Minister, and would like to point out that when he was asking for ideas, my suggestion to bring forward a conversation about youth and service in this House was shot down by the Conservative Party.
There you
and
go.
The other issue, I would like to respond to every Conservative who stood up and said that we're trying to push an election, that we want an election, that we're trying for an election. Have you seen the polls? Our interest right now is about saying you guys aren't doing good enough. And if someone else can support them, let them do it. But we cannot look at our...
On a point of order, the Honourable Minister.
Madam, I ask for unanimous consent of the House to extend that member's time for 5 minutes so he can continue on with his brilliance.